Hello everybody. This is an update on the 2 field experiences that you submitted and some thoughts on them in a general fashion that may inform some of your thinking on them. Excuse me as I check my notes as we go through this. In scenario 2, the one with the inclusion teacher who is having some difficulty due to her personal life, a couple of things that I'd like to point out to you that really frame this situation. The first is that you are getting this inquiry through your superintendent, who is your immediate supervisor, and also you have to take into consideration that he or she is being pressured by a Board of Education member whose child is in the person's class, period. That certainly influences the situation, whether you like it or not. It just is the reality. So a couple things that I would point out to you is that her previous record is pretty much spotless. There was 1 or 2 situations that point at some difficulty down the road, but in terms of documentation, it's pretty sparse. So one of the things that I would suggest to you is that you need to be thinking about the worst case scenario here is that this teacher doesn't get better and that you might have to take some kind of steps for removal. So in order to do that, you need to make sure that you have a lot of documentation in place. But before you go there, really, I think one of the things we have to think about is the human side of our enterprise, and that being that this teacher obviously has some situations going on in her personal life that obviously are complicating it significantly. And although we'd like to be able to say to ourselves, well, she has to do her job, the reality of the situation is that we have to work with people, and we have good times and we have bad times, and in the long run, is this an employee that is worth working with to try and help? And in most cases, the answer to that is going to be yes, because this person is already on your staff, probably at one point or another has shown some potential as a good teacher, or probably wouldn't still be there. But on another note, keep in mind that you're human as well, and I think it's hard to separate out the whole idea of the employer-employee thing here, in the sense that most likely the type of people that we're going to want to help this person out. So many of you didn't say much about the personal situation. I think sometimes maybe the best tact in this is, of course, we have to be careful about what we do here, but sometimes people just need a place to go to be able to talk. And if you're that trusted source as the immediate supervisor, that says quite a bit about your relationship with this employee. And most likely you'll be able to leverage that relationship to address the situation. With that being said, some things that I would suggest that you would bring with you as part of your plan that you're going to propose to the superintendent are the following. There's a series of observations that you will do, and not only you, but I would get some other perspectives on performance here. So it's not just one person, and perhaps it might be assistant principals, it might be a curriculum coach if you have those on your staff, and this might be a place where your assistant superintendent for instruction, some folks in district office might be able to help you out. If you didn't have access to that, sometimes in this case you might be able to get a principal or administrator from another school to help you out with this situation. I would do a number of unannounced visits because you don't want to see just the dog and pony show of the announced observations. And in this world of the 3-minute walkthroughs or the walkthrough technology, whatever your district calls it, this is a pretty prevalent practice, so people are used to that. So you would be assembling at least a mental model of what's going on through that process. One of the things that I also would suggest, and some of you did do this in your response, is the idea of mentoring here. This is a tool that you could use even though this person is advanced in their career path, might also be a good time to assign a trusted mentor. And somebody who's not in an evaluatory or supervisory role would be one where this person could develop a level of trust and rapport with this resource. Couple things else you could think about is have this person visit some model classrooms both in your district and outside of your district. Sometimes conferences or meetings or in services being held in a region might be a resource. Another thing that oftentimes is very telling is to videotape lessons and do an analysis with that person. And that might be a tool that the mentor might use in this particular case. So there's a non-threatening analysis situation. As I mentioned to you previously, we want to talk about the personal life. And again, I want to emphasize to you the idea that you have to be very careful here. And you really have to trust the strength of your relationship with this person and also what your gut is telling you. So I think that you have to address this second job and all the problems that seem to be coming out of that. Is this person tired? Are they doing adequate planning because of all the work they're doing? Perhaps look at the structure of the planning with the other teacher. Are you giving them time to plan together? And if not, you're really setting up inclusion for failure. One of the things that I would suggest you might want to think about is that the superintendent has charged you as the principal of making this inclusion model work. So one of the things you have to do is to make sure you're paying close attention to this situation, both as a indicator of inclusion as a whole, probably in its worst case in your building, but also you may want to examine what's going on in other classrooms as well. If this classroom is an indicator, there may be other hidden issues that are going on. By doing so, you may be able to develop a sense of the patterns of where the shortcomings are. You have discussed the idea of some surveys and so on in your professional development plans. This might be a place where you might be able to implement those surveys to gather some useful data. Scenario 2 is not an actual scenario per se. It's really kind of a synthesis of a number of them that I had in my experience. I can remember I had one special education teacher who was just a disaster, and she ended up, after an improvement plan, resigning because she, in her heart of hearts, knew that this wasn't working out. But you have to be very careful in these situations, make sure that you're erring on the side of due process for the employee. And I've always kind of thought about the idea that if and when it comes to severing the employment situation, if you've done all that you can as the leader and manager, basically people are satisfied with that and understand that the situation's not getting better. I've kind of facetiously said that if and when you get to that point and people say thank you as they walk out the door, you've probably done your job. I'd like to just now review number 3, scenario 3. And this is a really complicated one in the sense that this is, again, kind of a synthesis of some similar experiences I had as an administrator. I'd like to point out the root cause of what you're seeing there, and I think a lot of students miss this, was the idea that the superintendent had set up this committee where teachers were meeting with him directly, and there was no representation of other administration on this committee. So the teachers really had kind of this open door with the superintendent, and as a result of that, they were airing a bunch of complaints, not only about the situation in my school, but I mean this was rampant through the district. And if you noticed at the end of the scenario, I talked about the other principals had also had a similar experience. And as principals, you'll end up developing a network of people, and you talk regularly inside your district and outside your district as well. But in this particular case, we had shared with each other that this was occurring on a regular basis. Like the superintendent would meet with this committee, and then we would get these phone calls about these complaints. And obviously, this was bothersome to us. And as I mentioned in some of my responses to you, this is a highly politicized environment, and it really is questioning your competence as a educational leader. So as a result, what I would suggest to you is you have to think about these types of situations in a really global fashion, examining the root causes of where this is coming from and what might be some ways that you may address it. It's a highly political situation. And let me tell you, it was very frustrating because, in essence, what was happening was these teachers, who, for lack of a better term, were veteran malcontents who had jockeyed to get onto this committee, were using this as a way to undercut the efforts of not only me and my building, but other principals as well. And I think for some of you, you'll find that a bit foreign, but for others of you that may have worked in a unionized environment, then oftentimes there's this us-them mentality, and the teachers are trying to undercut a lot of your efforts. Now, I wouldn't discount that just because you don't have unions, that's not occurring, and it's something that you need to keep your finger on the pulse of. I often joke with people, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they're not out to get you. So, as a leader, that's something that you have to be aware of. Now, going back to the specific situation, one of the things that I would suggest you is to take a look at who's got your back in this situation. All right, one, you had a committee in place. The committee was composed of both parents and the assistant superintendent and some teachers. So this by no means was you foisting this change on the school in a vacuum. And in fact, I would suggest that you have a major ally in this situation in the assistant superintendent. Keep in mind that the assistant superintendent's part of that superintendent's cabinet, and as such, is a highly trusted advisor. So this person was sitting there, and they really were part of this process, probably from beginning to end. So this is a major ally for you as the principal in this situation, and certainly I would not hesitate to speak with that person directly. The other thing that I would suggest is that the other principals are big players in this, in the sense that they all had the same complaint about this chain of command being skirted. So what really happened, what we as the principals did is we kind of were discussing this clandestinely, not with the superintendent there, but really kind of without him as a player. And we decided to go to him, as a couple of us as representatives, to suggest to him that he wasn't getting the full, he wasn't getting all the information, he wasn't getting the full picture, and was reacting based on really not all the facts. And we suggested that we should have representation on the on this committee that was meeting with him directly, and to his credit, he decided that that was a good strategy, and as a result, we had a revolving representative at the table during these meetings. Interestingly enough, this changed the tenor of the meeting significantly. Certainly people were less likely to criticize you while you were sitting at the table, and if there was criticism, it could be addressed directly, or at least given back to the person being criticized, the representative, so that he or she could obviously address the situation. One of the things that some of you talked about, and I think it's a real good point, is that you would talk with the people who had the complaints and talk to them about the chain of command. I think that's a real valid point because um, we really hadn't heard some of these complaints, and obviously those should be first attempts to resolve them should be at the lowest component on the chain of command. So over time, what happened was we really kind of addressed the chain of command issue by having a rep at the table, and as a result, the conditions changed significantly, and we weren't hearing these phone calls from the superintendent like we were previous to addressing this. One of the things that I would suggest to you is some of you just suggested writing a memo to him or her. Now you got to. This is something you've got to grapple with directly. You've got to get in. You've got to understand that your competency is being questioned, and as a result of that, it could be an employment issue for you, in the sense that if it's not addressed and you don't do better in your immediate supervisor's eyes, you could have some employment problems. So with that being said, those are really some thoughts on field experience 2 and 3. Make sure that you proofread your work carefully, and we're getting towards the end of the course. Make sure that you have recorded any time that you spent on this field experience with your administration in your field experience log. Talk to you again soon.